Human growth and development section, 20 questions that you're scored for on the National Counselor exam, 12 rather, 12 questions, 20 on the CPCE. 20 is true of CPC on every section, but 12 for the NCE. So most of you are heading that direction. Human growth and development is an interesting conglomeration because we grow and develop in so many different ways as people. And there are theories for all of those different ways that we grow and develop. Whether it's cognitive, intellectual, whether it's personality, whether it's psychosexual, whether it's this, that, or the other. And so there's all kinds of theories in here and brief descriptions of them. So we're going to hit some of those as we go on. I think let's kind of page, and I'm going to stop you, Hither and Jan, and define some terms, explain some terms, and give you some information that I know has been on the exam in the past, which items have been near and dear to the exam people. But just kind of keep paging. Self-concept, you know what that is. You might want to review that a little bit. Developmental concepts. For those of you taking the CPCE, you may want to put a little mark there. A lot of detail in item number 5, and some of that I know has shown up on CPCE exams. So those of you heading that way, take note. Maslow, you need to know Maslow, but that shouldn't be much of a review. Hurd-Haverhurst has been on the exam, item 8. It's been a while since I've heard that. The behavioral concepts, you can expect a couple, 3 questions perhaps. Not so much about, you know, like the environment there manipulates biological, psychological drives. The conditioning principles have been popular for examining, item 11. So do pay attention to that part. The reinforcement schedule I know has shown up regularly. And so do note that. The psychoanalytic, psychosexual, Freudian stuff has been on the exam. I would know the stages, and sometimes the exam question will relate, you know, Freud's theory of this age with what's the comparable age with Erickson's, you know, stage. And so it might go in that kind of a compare and contrast thing. Remember that the CPCE has more detail in their questions. The NCE that most of you are preparing for is going to be a little bit more application oriented, a little bit more general in terms of application of concepts, and probably the analytical piece less on the detail and the recall stuff. Defense mechanisms, item 13, those we're going to know and love and use with our loved ones. Great items, some of them have shown up in the past, but just review them. Again, none of that should be real new to you. Erickson, count on Erickson showing up. You need to know, and I don't have, again, a mnemonic device for Erickson stages. I did a workshop in one of the Carolinas, and this lady, somebody asked about a mnemonic device for Erickson, and I didn't have any, but this lady said, you know, I have one. And she had a string of 8 obscene words. And she you know, spouted them out. Yeah, I didn't write them down, so I can't share them with you. But they work for her. So develop something if you want. It doesn't have to be obscene. But the other thing about Erickson stages, the question that you're going to see it more likely is some kid doing something and it looks like it's this stage, and the question will be, to what Ericksonian stage is this kid moving to next? So it's going to be at that level. It's not going to be Erickson's 3rd stage is about this, that, or that. It's not going to be that straightforward. Now, that might be a CPCE question, but it won't be an NCE question. So you're going to be a little bit more complex and application oriented. We have Piaget here. Actually, the word schema on Piaget has been on the exam some years ago. And again, I'm talking about on the exam the last, you know, could be 10, 12, 15 years. I mean, I've been in this business long enough, 21 years now, that I've heard comments and feedback all that time over the years. The other thing I wanted to ask you and share with you was that I love feedback. And if after you're done with the exam, whatever you are willing to share with me about the exam, I would just love. I mean, this is the place where I can use it, I can share it, and make really valuable use of it here. And you're going to be asked to sign a statement that says you will say nothing to anybody ever, anything about the exam or something like that. They're going to really commit you to something. I don't want you to violate anything. I only want you to share, generalities, ideas, perceptions, your own experiences with me to the extent you can. You can do it on an email message, use the feedback form and so on. But anything you do, I just love that because, and always tell me that you passed, and you will. And so that's just really heartening for me to know that, oh, there's a few more on the way now. That's good for me. Kohlberg, the three general levels have been on: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. I wouldn't go for, a lot of more detail there. Levinson, I think, is a long shot. Bronfenbrenner's been on the ecological approach. He's kind of our first systems guy, if you think about that. See, marriage and family people are very systems oriented. Well, Bronfenbrenner was kind of a systems dude way back then. Social learning models. Here we have some Albert Bandura, and I talk about self-efficacy here, and he talked about 4 mechanisms of increasing self-efficacy. And he talks about modeling, vicarious experiences, verbal persuasion, and so on. I think you need to know that. To me, he's a real stalwart in the social psychology field. And, I think when you think about his self-efficacy concept, it just makes a lot of sense with clients, some of your clients at least. Perry, you might go for the 3 general levels: dualism. Theories of how women develop. They've always left me wanting. As I was getting ready for this revision, I'm looking at stuff and literature reading and so on, and nothing's jumping out at me as a good cohesive theory of how women develop. But I did find Judith Jordan's stuff from the Stone Center at Wellesley, and I liked it enough that I put it in here. And so that's what you see here in this item on this page and the next. As at least one example of somebody's perception of how women develop. Some of the other writers in 22, Gilligan's been on the exam, and then I don't know about the others, but the next item, actually, I thought on the bottom of that page is Kohlberg's moral dilemma test. I thought somebody said that that was on the exam. You may want to make a note about that. There's a lot of controversy about that because women seem to use different approaches and perceptions and cognitive processes. Gail Sheehy's been on the exam. Next item. And then let's move a couple items. I'm going to move all the way to propinquity. Item 26. I don't know what it means, but it's been on the exam. And there it is. Abnormal human behavior. I would read through these definitions. Don't get real enamored with them. The causal models are probably a long shot. Item 32, mental status exam, I think would be worth knowing what that is about. And then I'm going to move all the way to item 38, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM. I didn't say earlier this morning, but I usually do, that because it's a general practice exam, there's going to be very, very little clinical stuff on this exam. And mostly I tell people don't take the DSM to bed. There will be a couple clinical items on this exam. And one of the items that has been on there floating around for a while that I've been attuned to is, so what's the difference in terms of, what's the criterion that distinguishes dysthymia from depression? And you would say duration. Depression is short-term, dysthymia is kind of like forever lasting. That's my understanding. So the differentiator between the two would be duration or length. There's been an item on bulimia and anorexia. And I think the question was something like, which is more apt to use laxatives to purge? Anorexics don't eat. So that probably wasn't the answer. So I think that was on. So you're going to get a clinical question. It could be on PTSD. It could be on something else. So be prepared for one or two of those. And mental health services, take a look at that. Let's go on to the next section, social and cultural foundations. Only 11 questions are scored for you on this whole section. 11 questions for the NCE, 20 for the CPCE. I've got a page and a half, couple pages of demographics and other characteristics about the US population. Take a look at that. Some of them might be surprising. I think most of them will not be. It's just kind of background. I don't think you need to worry about a lot of these showing up as exam questions. Socialization process, item 2. I think you know what that is. People are products of 5 different cultures. Item 3. I like this item because it tells us where it is that we have the empathy to counsel anybody from any culture. At the universal level, we're all biological beings. And because we have some possibility for empathy there. But beyond that, at the ecological level, national level, regional level, and so on, there could always be gaps. So always distances between us and whoever we're counseling. But at that one level, we have a chance to be in the same space. Differences, 4 and 5, culture, social value, class. I would read through these, cultural pluralism. Moving on to item 8. 7, I don't think is a big deal. I mean, it is, but not on the exam. But 8's been on the exam. 9's been on the exam. Prejudice, racism, ethnocentrism's been on the exam. White privilege, I have not heard, but I'm hoping it is. I think it's a very important item that I think we white folks have no idea what we're doing to others who are not white. And I think we need to be aware and sensitive to that. Next item, acculturation and assimilation have been on the exam. Cultural encapsulation, I like Gilbert Wren. I don't know if he's seen the light of day. Worldview has shown up. It's been on the exam, the emic and etic and so on. Now again, you know, when I tell you it's been on the exam, that means it could no longer be in the pool, or it may, I mean, 11 questions from this section. We've already seen 30 items. So obviously a lot of this stuff won't be on. You know, you way over study for this is what I want to say. And you hope that enough of that is going to make sense. And it will. You'll all pass and live happily ever after. And let me know that. At least that you passed. You know, the happily ever after, you can't tell yet. Multicultural counseling, 16, review that. Same thing with 17, 18, 19. I'm going to go all the way to item 21, racial cultural identity development model. You need to review that, have a bit of a handle on that. Counselor training issues 23, 24, 25. In item 25, kind of broken down into counseling women, counseling men, some of the issues that might be more specific to each of the genders. Again, good for review, nothing outstanding there. 26 is gay, lesbian, gay, bisexual. Social influence model of counseling. I like Stanley Strong's little theory here. It's, I think, often what it is that makes people come to us as counselees and stay with us because they view us as expert, attractive, and trustworthy. And the expert means credentials and education. And so get all the credentials you can and post them. Don't hide them in your desk drawer somewhere. Let people know that you have these credentials. Attractive is a like you're like them, not that you're physically attractive, trustworthy, you know what that is. The obvious in the next item's been on the exam, I've heard. And sometimes I think I was going to say before that I hear these items have been on the exam and I usually don't have a chance to ask the person because it's an email or a feedback form. And I know that people sometimes get confused by what they studied for hours and hours and hours for the exam and what was on the exam. And so, I'm not going to swear to any of this, at least not in a big Bible, maybe some little pocket size one. This is what I've heard, but whether the items in fact were on or will be on is something else. Disability and handicap, item 31. You need to get into this one and the next two items. They've been on the exam. Individuals with disability, the IDEA Act, know enough about it to know the generalities, and also ADA. ADA has been around now a long time. I think that's a Reagan Act, if I remember right. Does anybody remember that? But a good piece of legislation. 34, older adults. Some ideas about that and awarenesses that you ought to have. And I think because more and more of them are heading that way, as well as all of us, that's going to be a great market for folks who want to work with older adults. Family abuse and violence, I would read through that. Teenage suicide, about the same with that. Festinger, Leon Festinger, cognitive dissonance. What a great little theory has been on. In fact, Kubler-Ross has been on. That's an old on, from my recollection. Even Masters and Johnson, and I wondered when I first heard it that it was on this exam, why they would do that. But, it's somebody's whim and so on. Did show up once sometime. And then androgyny has shown up, and program accountability, item 44, kind of ties in with our program evaluation and so on. And won't ignore that completely. Questions about that? 11 questions out of all of that stuff. So good luck picking and choosing the right 11 pieces. Helping relationships, 36 questions. 36 questions for you and 20 for the CPCEers. So this is the biggie. This is the big section on the exam. But it's also, these 4 areas that I'm not reviewing thoroughly are those that I believe, and from what I know about counselors after 30 years, you can review on your own most effortlessly, expeditiously, and many of you are working in these areas. So it isn't like it's the new stuff like appraisal and research and certainly career. Those to me are the areas that you would value and review a whole lot more. So that's what I'm going with. But let's go through this and I'll highlight some things. On the bottom of that first page, I have a chart of all the theories summarized. So don't despair. We're going to get to that. But each of the theories, as you page forward now, you'll see a half a page or a page and so on. But there is more coming. And I'll show you where that is. There's so many names in here, even under Neo-Freudians, Karen Horney and Eric Fromm. And, I don't know if any of them has ever been on the exam. If you can kind of remember that they're Neo-Freudian, that's cool. Object relations, the broad stages of development there. Some of you might really be into and have a lot of handle on, and others of you might never have heard of this. So, again, it's a long shot, I think, most everything in this section, because it's a long section. Lots of theories, lots of people. Person-centered stuff, the Rogerian, you're probably well familiar with most of that. Again, don't worry about books or publication dates. Gestalt always shows up. A nice little theory. Individual psych, I think it's been on the exam, something about this, so I added it. Eric Berne, transactional analysis. You're going to find items in my practice exam for the NCE that are application items. And I'm going to give you a little vignette, a little scenario, and I'm going to give you, so which psychological or which counseling theory might be the most appropriate in this case. And sometimes I give you pairs of them. And I think it'll challenge you because I name almost all of these folks, you know, including TA and so on. And it might force you to kind of come back and re-review the theory, you know, which isn't a bad thing. I have a few of those kind of application questions in the NCE practice exam. Existential, the thing I think I added was logotherapy and Viktor Frankl. I believe that there was a mention of that on the exam. Cognitive and behavioral counseling, you know, where that comes from, the stimulus response, the counseling techniques. I've got some of them specifically delineated, some of the behavioral counseling techniques. Rational emotive behavior therapy, it used to be RET, multimodal, good general kind of an approach. The nice thing about Lazarus, he was the guy I heard in New Jersey that I couldn't remember. And he was the one that has kind of I think an advanced view on dual relationships. But he's the one that kind of builds into it, the body, the soma, and in his basic id questions. Reality therapy, good for some applications, probably better than others. Feminist therapy, there's a whole literature about that, and I've added some of the basic principles, and these came out of Corey, one of the more recent Corey books, page 89. Solution-focused brief therapy, big section for solution-focused, but again, really gaining in popularity. I think solution-focused and brief, because of the nature of the beast, because of the nature of getting through things and having fewer and fewer sessions and time being an issue and money being an issue and all of that, the kind of the whole thing is really arguing for more of a solution brief therapy approach. There's a lot of people who think that one session is all you need. And if you do it right, that's really good stuff. Now, you know, most of us would say, well, give me 6, give me 8, give me 10, give me 12. But a lot of insurance companies will not do that. You know, they'll give you 6 or 7 or 8. So some of you might become brief therapists, whether you want to or not, as you start getting insurance money. Narrative therapy, I think, is a really nice way, a cool way of looking at people's issues and problems and going with their story and believing in them rather than going from the expert, your story, and putting something on them. Some of the items in that are on the next page. Questions and clarifications, reauthoring, interesting concepts. Integrative counseling means that you, the therapist, take your own personal theory, kind of your philosophy and so on, and you build a counseling theory around that. Integrative is not taking other people's theories and jamming them together and using that. Integrative is your own to start with, and then you incorporate other things that work for you and your clients. A nice concept, and I don't know how many people do that, and maybe everybody does after a while. Maybe everybody starts as a Gestalter or a, you know, Rogerian, and eventually you can't even tell who they're anymore, they're themselves. And maybe that makes sense. And maybe it ought to be that way. And then the next 3 or 4 pages, we have theories of psychotherapy. I've taken 2 pieces out of Corey's book for each of these areas. He lists the basic philosophy and the key concepts. And I thought that would give you some background and then some kind of a little bit more advanced concepts, the key concepts for each of these major theories. And so you can, you know, add that to the original stuff that we've already looked at in this section. for Adlerian, existential, person-centered Gestalt behavior, cognitive behavior, reality, feminist, postmodern, and family systems. So all the major stuff is here. Remember in the NBCC book, I don't think we mentioned it, but they recommend that you compare and contrast theories in studying. So if you want to do that, this would be a good place to do that. So next item, 19, counseling skills. You need to review those. Some of those are likely to be on the exam. I can't tell which ones at this point, but I know that I've got a mark there. Kharkov, there's been a question about reflective error on the exam, and I think it goes back to Kharkov. On the bottom of the page, you as the counselor can make responses back to the client, and you can either add to that client's response, you can keep it neutral or subtract from it. And so, and if you take away from it, if you have a reflective error, what does that mean for the relationship? And I think that's where that exam item came from. So, you know, don't ignore Kharkov completely. And I've got an example of what that means on the next page. Carl Jung, I'm not sure that, you know, good stuff. Review that. You should probably have all of that in your head already. Birth order's been popular under Adler. Don't overlook that. Moving on, we have 25, 6, 7. We have some real behavioral kind of folks, and they're really neat theories. Internal communication system, negative cognitive shift for Beck. Wolpe has reciprocal inhibition, Meichenbaum, cognitive behavior mod, stress inoculation, all of that good stuff. You know, just really kind of neat approaches and examples of what you might think about doing with your clients, depending on their issues. Other behavioral techniques are there. And then moving on to the next page, Joe and Harry have been on the exam. The Johari window. Consultation has been on the exam. It's been on the exam for 30 years now. And I would review consultation and don't overlook the people that I've started, the list on the bottom and then the next page. Because you might be surprised that there'll be a couple of consultation questions and you don't want to miss them if you don't have to. Item 31, I added these in this edition because I think that they're important and getting more and more visibility. Animal-assisted counseling, we have an equine therapist in the room, and adventure-based counseling. You know, we've heard about that for a long time. And so here it is. Cyber counseling, we've talked about. Trauma and disaster counseling, here it is again. I think we can just skip right through that. Neurolinguistic programming, long shot. EMDR, probably long shot. Alcohol counseling, proxemics, I think, next item has shown up. And then we have a fairly long section that incorporates a multicultural issue with the major theory. Person-centered, existential, and so on. I got this from Corey, and so you know, another one you may want to pay attention to and spend a little time on. Now let's go to the second part of helping relationships, and that's family counseling. And those of you who haven't had a course or done any work in family counseling, you may want to pay more attention to this section. Those of you who've had coursework or done some family couple therapy, you know, maybe this is going to be a real quick review. I don't think you need more than what's in the book. I think go with this and let the chips fall. Paradigm shift, you know, all of this is pretty common sense for marriage and family counseling. The unit of treatment duration, life cycle of a family. Again, nothing seems real surprising to me. Family and ethnicity, alternative families, you know, we live them every day. We hear about them. Psychodynamics, starting with 46 or 45, we start getting into some theories of family counseling. And some of these folks have shown up. I'm not sure about Ackerman Framo, I think has been on the exam. Psychodynamic theory, experiential family, Carl Whittaker. I would just have a vague idea of what that means. What's experiential mean? Whether you attach Whittaker to it or not. Humanistic stuff, Satir. Family systems, Bowen. You need to know Bowen. Structural family therapy, Minuchin. Again, maybe you ought to know something about Minuchin. I'm surprised that the focus for NVCC for family counseling items I mentioned before is on a counselor working with a child, not with a couple, not with a family, but with a child. And yet there are theories that are addressed in their questions. So they're taking it back from the child counseling in a school setting or a clinic, an agency, a hospital, to the theory where you might get some ideas for doing that. So don't overlook. Do you remember any family? Was there? Okay, so there's not a good place for you. Okay, and now you know. So Minuchin, don't overlook Minuchin. Number 51, strategic family therapy, the MRI, some concepts there. Milan systematic or systemic. There's just so much here. There's so many theories. It's kind of overwhelming. Some people complain about career development having so many different theories. And I look at the family stuff and they put it through to shame. Not quite, but there's a lot here. Behavioral cognitive approaches, cognitive behavior therapy with families. It goes on and on. Social constructionist, postmodern. So narrative family therapy, psychoed family therapy. And then we have a table of 2 pages with all the comparisons of the major theories. Psychodynamic on the left side, experiential, transgenerational, structural, strategic, Milan. And you've got the people listed that are associated with that, the primary theme, unit of study, time frame, title or derivation, and the major concepts. Okay, let's finish this family piece up. Feminist issues, item 58, genogram. You need to know what that is. I suspect you do. In definitions, pick and choose a few if you want. Enmeshment, sculpting, genogram, joining. Marriage and family counselors, they don't establish relationships, they join, which I think is kind of interesting. And so on, open system, permeability. All of these are good words and some of them might show up. Okay, let's go on to the last section, group work. 16 items on this for the NCE, 20 for the CPCE. Definitions of a group, I think not critical here. I would take a look at item 4 though, and get a handle on that. The types of groups that's been on the exam, so do spend a little bit of time on that. Next item, group dynamics. Next item, group cohesion. Again, review them. You've had a course in group counseling, and some of you maybe do group work. Again, this should be a really good overview and review, and there shouldn't be a lot of new stuff here at all for you. A smaller section on the exam, 16 items. Roles of group members, styles of leadership's been on the exam. There's kind of the old traditional ways of looking at leadership. Number 8, I don't know about 9 rather. Number 10, the linking and blocking have been on. The next few items, universality, you need to know that. Resistance, co-leaders. When you take the practice exam, if you don't know your stuff, you're going to get back into this to get the explanation. And so some of it you're going to cover that way. But I only have, I have 16 questions on the exam. in the group area. So there'll be some that you'll probably need to revert back to the content, which is fine. That's a good way to study. Number 16, again, a quick review of those should handle that. Screening is important. I don't know if we isolated a whole lot. Ethical guidelines, informed consent, confidentiality, all good stuff. Now, stages of a group, item 20, you need to spend a little time on this. There are people who believe there are 4 stages of a group, some that believe there are 5 stages, and Corey now believes there are 6 stages. He added a stage he calls pre-group formation, and the 6th one is post-group. Well, those to me are not quite stages of a group. The other 4 in the middle of that are, but I would know the groups, the stages of a group. You're going to get question 1 or 2 about that. And again, you might well get a question as, this seems to be going on in this group. This is the kind of activities and so on, the relationships between the group leader and the group members. What's the next stage that this group is working toward? Something like that. They won't ask you specifically what the 4th stage is. Okay. So it'll be more of an application sort of question. On the CPCE, it could be more direct in terms of what the stage is all about. YALM, I think, might be a long shot. Group leader functions come out of YALM. Interesting stuff. They're A, B, C, and D. And, you know, to the extent you have some time and energy, take a look at that. I'm not sure that's been tested at all. Waldo, same sort of thing with that, kind of continues with the leadership issues for groups. Moreno and psychodrama, you can expect that. That's been on regularly, even the last time. It's know the characters in a psychodrama. Number 25, family counseling, couples counseling, primary, secondary, tertiary. Know that. Don't go home without that. Primary prevention is, somebody once said, don't just keep pulling bodies out of the water. Go upstream and see who's throwing them in. That's primary prevention. Secondary groups, tertiary groups. You know, this kind of goes along with, we talked about social justice counseling and getting out in the community and doing more prevention work, primary work, instead of waiting for people who are bad enough that they have to come in for services. So fits in with that. 27, group counseling and multicultural issues. 28, research, outcome research, process research. Counseling theory applied to group work, item 29. This is another long group, and I won't mention the back part. But it's like a chart horizontally. It isn't, or not vertically like the other charts. But for each of these major psychometric or psychotherapy groups, psychoanalytic, for example, you've got the goal, the techniques, the content, the focus, what a leader does principally, and a multicultural item. And so there's a lot of information. I got this from both Corey and Gladding on the next few pages, kind of a good summary for 6 pages or so. One counselor that I've talked to said what he would do is he would make a chart of all of these and you know, name the individual theory and then list the group concepts that go along with that, and found that real useful. There are people who made flashcards out of my entire study guide. They've written all the major concepts out, however they wanted, and then they would have them to study with. And as they were doing that, they were learning it, then they would study it. And if they had a study buddy, they would have something to work with. And so lots of ways of studying. Don't just be constricted with your old ideas of graduate school, whatever those ideas are. So, and let's see, what else we have? A little bit more of Adler here at the end. And then the association in ACA that deals with group stuff, ASGW. Review the major additions and revisions of the 7th edition of this study guide. I'd like you to turn to the section number 1 in the study guide, Human Growth and Development. We'll be starting with item number 38. That's on page 44. Okay, DSM-5 is our topic. Item 38, page 44. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders was revised in 2013, and the revision is by the American Psychiatric Association. The information that I have in the next several pages here on the DSM-5 comes from a book published by ACA, American Counseling Association. The book is titled DSM-5 Learning Companion for Counselors, and the full reference is at the end of the study guide. In item 39, we have some changes between the DSM-5 and the DSM-4. Structural changes, first of all. In the new edition of the DSM, there is no longer an axial classification system. The 5 axes are no longer available for diagnosis. Another major structural change is that the GAF scale has been dropped. The Global Assessment of Functioning scale is no longer available. The V code are still there. The V codes are there and the list is expanded, so that's another structural change. On the philosophical side of changes between the DSM-5 and the 4 edition, let me start under the philosophical item. The focus for identifying disorders shifts from symptoms of and behavior to identifiable pathophysiological origins. It seems to me that more and more of the disorders are viewed as being physiologically based. And that has some repercussions and implications for diagnosis and treatment. And perhaps the biggest implication is the fact that perhaps psychopharmacology, the treatment with drugs, will be more often viewed as an alternative to some of the diagnoses. And the other consequence is that the talk therapy of counselors will be less viewed as the first choice for some of the disorders. Okay, so that'll be a major philosophical change from the previous edition of the study guide. Another philosophical change is the reliance on dimensional assessments in the current new DSM-5 versus a rather categorical description of disorders which happened on the DSM-4. Okay. Now, turning the page to selected diagnostic category changes, you can read through those, and I think that third one down may be of interest to you. It used to be that both autism and Asperger's disorder were separate disorders. Now they are under one umbrella, and it's called autism spectrum disorder. And you can look at the other ones available there. On the bottom of the page, you'll notice another note to the reader that it may be that out of the entire DSM-5 area, there might be 2 or 3 clinical types of questions on the exam. Not very many more than that, because this whole section, Human Growth and Development, has 12 questions. And there's a lot of information in this Human Growth and Development section. So maybe 2 or 3 questions that'll revolve around the DSM-5. So don't get real obsessive about preparing for the exam looking at the DSM-5 material. And the other thing that happened in terms of my presenting the information here on the disorders, I summarize all of the disorders here in the rest of this section of the study guide. I did that in the order that the book presented the disorders, that DSM Companion for Counselors book. The authors of that book felt that counselors are more apt to deal with some disorders than others, and that's how they presented them in the book, and that's how I summarized them in my study guide here. So item 41 has depressive disorders, then it goes to bipolar, anxiety, and you can page back and obsessive compulsive and so on. All the way to item 49 is where we get into more physiologically based disorders, specific behavioral disruptions, and then neurodevelopmental, neurocognitive disorders, schizophrenia, and then we have dissociative, somatic, and so on. And so the last few disorders listed are certainly diagnosable by counselors, but chances are that counselors would refer these individuals for more medically oriented psychotherapy, such as psychiatrists might provide, or some psychologists and others. Okay, so that's the DSM-5. Okay, next I'd like to talk a little bit about neurobiology. This is in section 1 of the study guide, Human Growth and Development. It's in item 6, neurobiology, page 25. Neurobiology and that whole area of neuroscience is becoming more and more important for counselors. As you look at the literature in the counseling field or attend conventions of ACA and look at the programs being offered, there is more and more emphasis on the mind-body connection, neurobiology, and the importance for counselors to understand that relationship, because a lot of what they do in terms of counseling and therapy really involves the mind, the body, and not just the psyche. And so page 25, the long quote there by the authors, Ivy, D'Andrea Ivy, I want to read that to you. The mind is the product of the activity occurring in the brain at the molecular, cellular, and anatomical levels, which are in turn impacted by a person's interpersonal relationships, cultural context, and societal experience. So everything we do, whether it's your client or yourself, and your cultural experiences, your relationships, and so on, will impact the brain, the mind, and the relationship of that to the body. And on the next page, we have a concept called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters affect various cognitive, emotional, physiological, and behavioral reactions in people. And so these are important to know about, neurotransmitters. They carry messages between neurons, the neurotransmitters do. And in the middle of that page, we have 4 principal neurotransmitters that counselors probably want to be able to have some familiarity with. And they're called acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, and gamma amino. And so you may want to put these in your memory bank somewhere, because if they show up on the exam, you'll want to be able to at least relate them to the neurobiology section of the item. Now, I'd like to continue the neurobiology item and talk about it and its relationship to psychotherapy. And for that, we're going to move back to section 3 in the study guide. It's page 101, and it's item 20. Item 20, neurobiology and psychotherapy. And at the top, the brain grows and differentiates through its continuous interaction with the environment. The brain is not static. It constantly changes and grows with the experiences of the organism. Psychotherapy can restructure neural networks in the brain. That's a pretty significant statement. Psychotherapy will do that. 3 parts to the brain: the surviving brain, the feeling brain, and the thinking brain. A key concept here is neuroplasticity. It's the brain's ability to produce new neurons and reorganize itself. Now, various counseling approaches will facilitate that kind of neuroplasticity. And on the next page, we have another statement by the authors, Ivy, D'Andrea Ivy. Most counseling relationships foster the development of new neurons and neural networks, whether counselors know that or not. So whenever you're doing counseling, you are stimulating neuron development and neural network development, okay, through the neurotransmitters. Other ways to increase the production of positive neurotransmitters. It doesn't have to be talk therapy. It could be some of the integrative therapies, such as art therapy, music therapy, physical movement, relaxation, yoga, and so on. Near the bottom of the page, we have CACREP, Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs. CACREP also realizes the importance of neurobiology and counselors understanding the mind-body connection. And so they are asking that counselor training programs at the master's level include concepts
for the counselor to become aware of in terms of neurological behavior and its relationship to what we do in counseling. And so you'll see that now in the CACREP standards. I'd like to talk next about dialectical behavior therapy. We're back in section number 1, human growth and development, item 11. It's on page 88. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is not a new kind of therapeutic approach. A lady by the name of Marsha Linehan and others developed this technique, counseling approach, because of their frustrations in working with borderline personality disorder clients. These are very tough clients to work with, as some of you already know. Now, DBT is used way beyond borderline personality disorders, with many other kinds of eating disorders, brain injury people, and so on. A component of DBT is group counseling. There's usually a group component attached, in part because DBT requires the understanding and learning and practicing of skills by the client, okay? And so the group process and a longer term intervention is really necessary and expected when you use DBT. 4 different kinds of skill areas are conceptualized in the use of DBT, and they are listed on the bottom of page 88. Mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. Okay, so now let's go to mindfulness and talk some more about that. And we're going to jump all the way to page 103. We are in the 3rd section of the study guide, helping relationships. Item 21, mindfulness. Mindfulness, as we saw, is one of the components of DBT. There are 2 major aspects of mindfulness. One is that the client focus on one's own experience. So it's kind of a here and now approach. And the experience that the client is focusing on is their anxiety, their discomfort, their sensations, bodily sensations, and thoughts and so on that are probably unacceptable to them. And so that's the first order of business for mindfulness, is to focus on those kinds of physical sensations, emotions, and thought. The other focus of mindfulness is to develop a change in the relationship to these sensations, to see if the client can develop a different relationship to these negative sensations, typically the anxieties, the worries, the doubts, the fears, and so on. And as they develop that different relationship, these sensations will have less power over them. Okay, and this is kind of a reframing sort of way. You're looking at something going on in you, your sensations, your thoughts, your feelings, anxieties, from a different perspective. And so they're not nearly as debilitating and powerful in their relationship to how the client functions. Okay. Now, the application of mindfulness is been used primarily for cognitively oriented therapy approaches, but now it's used much, much more broadly for people with depression, generalized anxiety disorders, PTSD, and many other kinds of issues. The last part I'd like to review with you in the new edition of the study guide, the 7th edition, is the Code of Ethics, the ACA Code of Ethics. We're in the last section of the book, Professional Orientation, on page 283, and this is the item number 32, Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics gets revised about every 10 years by ACA. This is a 2014 edition. The last edition came out in 2005. And the entire code is reproduced at the back of my study guide. So you have all of it right here in front of you if you choose to review it here. There are a couple issues in this latest revision of the Code of Ethics that I'd like to address that are a little bit different than we've seen in previous codes of ethics. And moving on to page 287, one of those issues is listed there, item number 10. Managing and maintaining boundaries and professional relationships. In the old days, this was more nearly called dual relationships. Having a dual relationship with the client was typically viewed as aversive, as negative, probably as unethical. Now, the concept is more managing and maintaining boundaries with clients, and dual relationships in the old term, they in fact can be positive with clients. They can facilitate the relationship that you have with clients. On the bottom of the page, you have a couple examples. You are invited to an important event in a client's life, his or her wedding or the funeral of a family member. Would you not go to that? Would that not strengthen the relationship by supporting your client through that experience if you went? How about attending a community event, a cultural event, a festival, a gay pride parade in support of the client? And again, it could be very positive for the relationship, although some might say that, well, that's a dual relationship. Well, it is, but you're managing and maintaining professional boundaries with that. Another example I'd like to mention is the small town counselor or therapist. There are many towns in the United States, different states, that are not near large metropolitan areas. And you may be the only or one of 2 or 3 therapist counselors in that small town. Your chances of running into clients that you know or families of clients or former clients is incredibly high. Dual multiple relationships will be unavoidable in small towns. You go and buy a car at a car dealership, and one of the salespeople there is a former client. The lady that's checking you out at the grocery store is the mother of a client. Or perhaps you're in a church, in a choir, and next to you stands a family member of a former client. And so these dual relationships will be unavoidable. And so there's always other issues in small towns and being a therapist, a counselor in a small town. On the bottom of that page, 288, there is another issue called practicing distance counseling. Distance counseling is cyber counseling using all kinds of technologies, whether you're Skyping or phoning or using batch emailing, whatever it might be. There are issues around ethics and that. And one of the concerns for the ACA code, this version, is that you have informed consent with your client, no matter where the client lives. Let's say you've never seen the client and the client lives across the state or in another state. You still need to have an informed consent with the client about the relationship, the counseling relationship. You also need an informed consent around the technology that you're going to be using. Are they okay with it? What kind of security is there around the technology? And also informed consent around social media issues. For example, Googling a client is an invasion of privacy. You can't do that without his or her permission. If you have a Facebook account established, a personal Facebook account, you can't have clients access that. You need to have a professional Facebook account that's available for clients to access if in fact they want to do that. Following a client on social media outlets is not acceptable. That's unethical unless you have permission to do that. So there's new wrinkles coming down the pike, especially as it happens around distance counseling. And so be cautious about that. And if in fact you find yourself doing distance counseling, be fully aware of the ethical issues that are involved. Okay. Now, let me turn to the last item of this section on page 292, called the American Counseling Association. This is the grandmammy, the granddaddy of counseling organizations that over 55,000 counselors now belong to. And these 55,000 counselors have all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of skill sets. They work with all kinds of clients requiring different kinds of expertises and so on. And yet they belong to ACA, one National Counseling Association. There are in fact 20 divisions in ACA, so it's a very diverse set of people with the 20 divisions. And one of the divisions, the name has changed, and I'd like to let you know what that is. The fourth division from the bottom list in the list there on page 292, Association for Counselors and Educators in Government. That no longer is the case. The new name is Military and Government Counseling Association. Military and Government Counseling Association. Okay. Now, that's the end of the workshop. Thank you, and hope it's been productive, and it's been a good start to your exam preparation. Now it's your turn. Develop a study plan for